Keanu Reeves dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans, he appears on a street corner in the suburbs of Chicago. He's as unnoticeable among the passersby as any other person. But it is at this moment that a story begins that will change one guy's day, and maybe even his life. Keanu doesn't know that today he will witness one of the most vivid moments in a stranger's life. On this day, he was out of focus. He was just an ordinary person who decided to go to a cafe, like any other. His appearances in big cities are always accompanied by flashes of cameras, but here in Chicago, on the outskirts, Keanu is just a man who went to a cafe to eat, relax, and take a little rest between shoots. He steps off the bus stop, looking around. The old brick facade of the building, the faded signs, and a couple of dim lights all create the atmosphere of a bygone era, where everything moves slowly and steadily. It's raining outside and there are as few people as usual, but the cafe seems to be quite crowded. Keanu decides to go in and get a cup of coffee. His head is filled with thoughts about work, filming, and how he lacks personal time. Jason, the 24-year-old guy standing behind the bar, glances at Keanu for a moment. But he doesn't perceive him as someone unusual. Perhaps he doesn't recognize him. For Jason, people like Keanu Reeves are something distant that doesn't touch his real life. Jason takes orders, holds back fatigue, but every day of work is a struggle. Here, among those who come to the cafe every day, no one sees him. He is just part of the decor, by himself, unnoticeable. And it has always been like that. His internal struggle is invisible to others, but it is there. Today is a day like any other, gray, dull, with another portion of humiliation from those who think that they can afford everything. Jason has his own dreams, but they all seem so far away that he has stopped voicing them. Being a barista is not what he dreamed of, but it has to be. Every day is an opportunity to survive, nothing more. Today, like every time, he was preparing to serve people with a smile. But his mood is getting worse because his work does not bring satisfaction, and each new order seems to him another step to nowhere. Keanu notices Jason looking lost as he passes the counter. There is that tired look in his eyes that only a person who can see beyond the work will notice. This was not just a meeting in a cafe. Keanu already senses that there is more going on here than just two people meeting by chance. He feels the tension inside, without seeing it coming at Jason. For a moment their eyes meet, and Keanu smiles a little, as always, but then decides not to intervene. But his intuition is nagging at him. At this point, the cafe is filled with noise. Several people take seats by the window. Someone is talking on the phone. Jason continues to perform his duties with an expression as if he is simply performing a function in this world, and not living. Keanu chooses a table by the window and slowly opens his laptop to get to work. He is not looking for attention. He is simply sitting, lost in thought, in the atmosphere of an ordinary American cafe where no one expects to see a celebrity. Jason sits at the bar, uncertainly leafing through yet another magazine that he took from the cafe's shelf long ago. He doesn't read it. He just flips through the pages, not noticing the content. Amid the continuing noise, conversations, and sounds of the coffee machine, his thoughts are increasingly immersed in memories. He doesn't notice how the clock is already past noon, and the line in front of him continues to grow. Coffee is brewed, sandwiches are ordered, but in Jason's head there is nothing except what he has experienced in recent months and what awaits him in the future. He has been working in this cafe for almost a year. From the day he was invited to work here, he had the feeling that he needed to do it not so much to earn money, but to avoid another unbearable situation at home. His mother, Liz, an alcoholic, rarely remembered his name. She was drowning in her own problems, and Jason became her constant savior. He was the one who endured her daily attacks. Her aggression, her silent reproaches about how he could never be a normal child. At some point, it became his life, rescuing her, trying to please her, listening, but never hearing anything in return. Jason's father had left when he was a little boy. His mother had said he couldn't live with a woman like that. Jason had never understood what that meant, but it still felt like his fault. He couldn't believe his father could leave him, his family. It was hard. Growing up and realizing you couldn't change the reality you were in was excruciating. There was always a wariness on the faces of those who knew him when they met him at school. Being invisible was something Jason had learned to do since he was a child. He was the guy no one talked about. The guy who couldn't turn in his homework on time because there was no time at home. The guy who his parents left in front of the TV all day when they went out on business. From then on, he learned to be quiet and unnoticeable. Jason learned not to complain, learned not to expect anything. At school, they called him the shadow, the guy with problems. But at home, it was even worse. He tried not to give in. He tried to be kind, tried to be the one who would always help, no matter what. Working at the cafe, he felt like he was somehow managing to stay afloat. All these small steps towards being normal were something important to him. He never complained to his colleagues. His habit of hiding his pain from others became a kind of defense, and he perceived working behind the bar as a small victory, at least in showing the world that he could cope. He's afraid to go home because he knows his mother is crazy again. He's afraid that his life won't change, that he'll still be seen as the guy with problems, whose dreams will never come true. All he wanted was to feel a little bit like a human being. But every morning, when he came to work, he got ready. He pushed all these thoughts aside and tried to be strong. He knew that if he showed weakness even once, it would be over. His life would again become this dark place that no one wanted to go into. Jason was a man who had learned not to expect much from life. His dreams of one day becoming something important, of one day opening his own cafe, seemed too far away. He laughed at these thoughts when they came to mind. Who was he to dream? He was just a barista. But he kept going, every day, through the weight of this world. Today, Jason felt especially vulnerable. For some reason today, it was hard for him to hide this pain. He felt like he couldn't live in this world of loneliness anymore, in a world where no one could see him. It was like a pressure that was getting stronger every day, and it seemed like there was no way to hide from it. And so, as he continued to work, brewing another cup of coffee and facing constant humiliation from customers, he suddenly noticed that someone, not just a customer, was looking at him. The cafe was getting noisier. People were coming in, ordering, and the atmosphere was gradually getting tense. Jason felt his inner tension growing. He carefully placed a cup of coffee in front of the next customer, but his eyes could no longer hide the fatigue. He felt his nerves beginning to give in under the weight of constant reminders that his life was nothing more than a series of mundane and seemingly meaningless actions. He approached each new order with caution, as if each word could be the last straw that would break him. And then everything suddenly got worse. A middle-aged man appeared at the entrance to the cafe. At first glance, he was unremarkable. He was neither particularly attractive nor tall, but his behavior immediately attracted attention. He acted as if he owned the place, and everyone else around him was just decoration. His gaze was cold, with a slight expression of disdain. He approached the bar and, without saying a word, joined the line. Jason, noticing him, felt his tension increase. The man, Rick, was the kind of customer Jason encountered every day, arrogant, pretentious, the kind who always thought he could get away with more than others. He ordered a coffee as if it were a matter of course, and with the air of a man accustomed to unconditional service, pulled out his phone. When Jason placed the coffee cup in front of Rick, Rick took it abruptly, without thanking him, and tipped a few coins into the register as if it were just an obligation. Jason sensed the mockery in his gaze. He already knew that this customer would not be the last to look at him with disdain, but it still did not make it any easier. He tried to ignore it, but then Rick stepped forward and, as if for his own amusement, said, "You can't even order properly, can you? What's taking you so long? Do you have a problem?" It was like a knife blade piercing his self-esteem. Jason felt his heart beat faster and his hands trembled slightly. He could no longer hide the tension, it was too painful. However, he restrained himself, knowing that if he reacted, it would only make the situation worse. Meanwhile, Rick did not stop. "I don't understand how people like that can even work in a cafe. Seriously, you can't do anything fast, can you? Aren't you ashamed to work like this?" His words became more and more sarcastic, and Jason felt his patience slowly melting away. Rick was clearly enjoying the situation. He was beginning to attract the attention of the other customers, who had fallen silent as they watched Jason hold his own. Some glanced in their direction, but no one dared intervene. Seeing this moment, Keanu calmly and confidently approached the bar, ignoring the man who continued to mock Jason. Keanu listened to Rick's last words as if he hadn't noticed him, and only smiled, adjusting his hair. Then Keanu calmly but persistently addressed Rick. "You don't think that anyone has the right to treat a person like this, do you?" Keanu said, looking straight into Rick's eyes. "This guy is trying. You may not be happy, but do not humiliate him for it. All people have the right to respect, no matter who they are and what they do. You don't know what this guy has been through, but you chose to humiliate him. It's wrong." It was a moment when the space in the cafe changed, and Jason felt the air become lighter. Keanu Reeves did not shout, did not raise his voice. He just said it calmly but persistently. Rick, clearly feeling awkward, immediately began to justify himself, but his words sounded weak and unconvincing. He still tried to pretend that he was the boss here, but Keanu stopped him. "Come on, get away from this guy," Keanu said, barely raising his voice, but with such confidence that Rick did not dare to protest anymore. He turned and hurried out of the cafe, although he was clearly annoyed. Keanu Reeves turned to Jason and smiled and said, "Don't let anyone talk to you like that," and winked before finishing his sentence. Jason stood there in complete amazement. He felt his hands stop shaking, the bitterness and shame slowly receding. After Keanu stepped in and stood up for Jason, the atmosphere in the cafe could be felt. It seemed like the air became lighter, and the customers who had been silently watching the situation began to noticeably relax. Keanu, as if nothing had happened, returned to his table, calmly ordering a cup of coffee. However, his actions left a mark on this place, this moment. Jason felt the tension that had been clenching him from the inside slowly release. His hands, which had been shaking just a moment before, now felt solid. He didn't know what to make of this new sensation, but it was amazing. He stood there in silence, looking at the one who had just stood up for him, not knowing how to react. And then, as if by magic, his thoughts began to clear. He suddenly realized that he shouldn't be the kind of person who could be humiliated. He shouldn't allow himself to be the kind of person who would feel insignificant because he was told to be. Keanu Reeves gave him a chance to look at himself differently. Not as weak and defenseless, but as a person who deserves respect. When Keanu Reeves stood up to leave, he walked up to Jason, put his hand on his shoulder, and said, "You're great. Always stand up for yourself. You deserve respect, always." And with that, he left the cafe. But his departure was not like the departure of ordinary people. It was a departure with a message. His actions left something important in the air, important to Jason, important to this place. Jason stood there, unsure of what to feel. But he knew one thing. His life had changed. The moment Keanu had stepped in, he had become stronger. He was no longer just a barista trying to please people without feeling respect for himself. He was a man who could stand up for his rights. The silence in the cafe fell as soon as Keanu Reeves left, but it was different than before. It was lighter, less tense than it had been just a few minutes ago. Jason stood at the counter, feeling his inner state change. Instead of continuing to feel small and insignificant, he now felt a surge of strength, confidence, and even pride. The cafe hall was filled with conversations, but the atmosphere was different. People began to talk about what had just happened, but with respect, as if they understood that each person deserved justice, not bullying. Jason noticed how several people who had previously ignored him began to send him encouraging glances and smiles. It was a new experience, one he had not felt for a long time. Some time had passed, but for Jason it was filled with new thoughts. He returned to his work as if the world itself had changed a little around him. He approached his workstation with a determination that had been given to him by Keanu's intervention. As he placed another order and handed the cup to the customer, he felt like a different person. He was no longer just a barista who did his job like an automaton. Now he was a person who knew that he deserved respect. He continued to do his job, but with a different inner strength. It was no longer just a daily routine. Each order, each customer was an opportunity for him to show his individuality and even help someone with a smile that now came naturally, not forced. A few days passed, and life continued as usual. But a week later, Rick came to the cafe again. He walked in with the same confident air as the first time, but now Jason was not the same weak and hesitant man who could be easily put down. Rick walked up to the counter, ordered a coffee, and glanced at Jason. He probably expected to see the old Jason, who would be afraid to look him in the eye, but that didn't happen. Jason stood with his back straight and smiled. "Hello, Rick. How can I help you?" he said with respect, but also with a confidence that had previously seemed impossible. Rick, noticing his calm, tensed up a little. He shrank back, as if something was wrong, but he lacked the strength he had before. He took the coffee without saying anything about what had happened. He simply paid silently and left, but without the pressure he had used to try to pressure Jason. Jason's confidence grew with each passing day. It wasn't just an outward change, but an inner transformation. He became a role model for his colleagues, especially for Keith, a senior employee who had once been inclined to ignore Jason. One day, after Jason had received yet another compliment on his work from a satisfied client, Keith approached him. "You've really changed, Jason. You seem so much more confident now." "It meant a lot to me," Jason replied. "I started to think that I shouldn't let anyone tell me I wasn't worth anything anymore." This was important not only for Jason, but for his colleagues as well. Their relationships changed. They began to see him as an equal, rather than as someone to be ridiculed or ignored. Meanwhile, the video of Keanu Reeves intervening in the cafe went viral and quickly spread across the internet. People started sharing the moment, discussing how important and meaningful Keanu's intervention was. Everyone praised him for showing humanity to another person, showing the world how important it is to stand up for yourself and not allow yourself to be humiliated. The video also sparked a lot of discussion, with many talking about how important it is to support each other, rather than be indifferent, as happened in the cafe before Keanu intervened. When Jason saw the video, his heart fluttered. His face flashed in the frame next to Keanu, and it was like he was part of that big moment again. He didn't expect his life to change so much. Not only did he gain confidence, but he also realized that his story could inspire others. Sometimes Jason would meet people who would tell him how his story had impacted their lives. For Jason, this was unexpected and gratifying. He never expected his life to become an example for someone else. But now he knew that even small actions could be important to others. His story had become part of something bigger, a movement for self-respect and maintaining boundaries. The Keanu Reeves video, as expected, continued to gain popularity. Every time Jason checked his social media feed, he found new messages where people shared the moment, expressed gratitude for the actor's actions and for the situation itself. In some comments, they wrote, "Keanu, you made the world a little better. Thank you for showing how important it is to support each other." The video became a symbol of kindness and justice, and Jason felt part of this movement. With each passing day, Jason felt like he could move on. He began to make big plans for his life. Working at the cafe no longer felt like a permanent job. He began to dream of owning his own cafe or business. He wanted to create not only delicious coffee, but also an environment where people would feel valued. He began taking business and management courses in the evenings, something he had never imagined he would do. Jason became an active participant in the entrepreneurial community, finding people who shared their knowledge and experience. He no longer saw himself as a person limited to one job, but began to strive for more. Jason began to believe that you can start small, but move forward with each step. Keanu and Jason's story reminds us that each of us can be a part of someone else's story that changes their world, even if it's just one kind word at the right moment. If this story touched your heart, remember that a kind word can change someone's day. Don't be shy about showing attention and support to those around you. Even small actions can give people self-confidence and light in their lives.